Well, welcome to Jesus and the Multitude, chapter 23 of Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking. I'm Reverend Lance, the minister here at First Congregational United Church of Christ in Alpena, and with me across the table is Lee Copeland. Lee Copeland has a long history of background, much of it being in the evangelical tradition, and he has come to us with a lot of reading, and T. Wright, Dr. Gene Scott, and various people. And in the middle is our pastor emeritus from the church here, Reverend Bob Case, my predecessor here in the pulpit. It's good to have you all back for this conversation. The topic of Jesus and the multitude, Brian McLaren points out a three-tiered sociology. At the top, he says 1, 3, 5% maybe of the people at the pinnacle. They're the ones that hold and hoard a lot of the wealth, the power, the influence. The opportunities are open to them. And they make networks throughout media, government, and the rest. And then below that is what he calls the multitudes, or the masses, many of whom are on the verge of powerlessness, poverty. A great number of them are the day laborers, simple professions, small farmers, children, various people that are on the verge of being expendable in the eyes of the elite. But in between, there are some mediators, some middle tier management type people, stewards, tax collectors, ones, as he says, in fact, I'll read it from his page 107 here. The three-tiered system in the middle are stewards, tax collectors, and their associates who extract income from the poor and the powerless that are below them for the sake of the rich and the powerful who are above them. Well, in addressing the social realities of his day, Jesus constantly turned that normal dominance pyramid upside down, to the confusion even of his own followers. And I'm going to give some examples, and this is again page 107 in the book. Take, for example, the time a group of parents brought their little children to Jesus to be blessed. Their great teacher had important places to go, important people to see, so the disciples tried to send them away. But Jesus rebuked them. "Let those little children come to me," he said, "for of such is the kingdom of God." Or take the time that Jesus and his disciples were passing through Samaria, a region that proper folks hated to pass through because its inhabitants were considered religiously and culturally unclean. Jesus decided to wait outside the city while his companions went into town to buy lunch. And when they returned, Jesus was sitting by a well, deep in a spiritual, theological conversation with a Samaritan woman, and one with a sketchy reputation at that. The sight of Jesus and this woman talking respectfully was a triple shock to the disciples. Men didn't usually speak with women as peers. Jews didn't normally associate with Samaritans. And clean people didn't normally interact with those that they considered morally stained. Or take the time Jesus and his disciples, accompanied by a large crowd, passed a blind man along the road. The man seemed marginal, insignificant, just another beggar. And the people around told him, "Quiet down," when he started crying out for mercy. But to Jesus, he mattered. The same thing happened when Jesus was on his way to heal the daughter of a synagogue official named Jairus. Along the way, Jesus was touched by a woman with an embarrassing female problem that rendered her unclean. She didn't even think she was important enough to ask for Jesus' help. Jesus healed her, publicly affirmed her value, and then he healed the official's little girl. Little children, a Samaritan, a man who might today be classified as disabled, certainly unemployed, a frightened, unclean woman, a little girl. See, they all mattered to Jesus. Weak, vulnerable people, the multitudes, they all mattered to Jesus. Again, that's Brian McLaren's comment and gives us a good sense of who we're talking about when we talk about the multitudes, the many. We also have this kind of triangular way of looking at society, with elites at the top who are the movers and the shakers, the power brokers, the ones that hoard and have much of the wealth, power, influence. And in the middle, people who are stewarding that system, often to the advantage of the power brokers and drawing assets from the multitude. That's the picture of what this particular chapter deals with. And having heard a sermon about it, my synopsis right now, what are some of the things that struck you? And I'll start, Lee, if it's okay with you. What in particular struck you in this, either as a challenge, a question, or inspiring? What would you like to begin with?
Well, it started off You know, the very strong language and negative tone of describing that system, the economic system, felt like where we were going was going to be a kind of common anti-establishment complaint about the economic structure per se. And in those examples, I don't see, you know, the children is a good example. Didn't seem to fit that. That's not what he's really complaining about. And in the message, it wasn't as you could take those first things, hoarding the money, making the rules, rigging the game. It sounds like, you know, standard. We have a corrupt system, and that could be used to inflame the people in the lower to rise up and overthrow it. And when that language of putting the pyramid on its head, I kept saying, oh, I'm seeing this going, that he's feeding a narrative that would be almost certainly understood by the people around as being a revolutionary thing, and he wasn't. As a matter of fact, Jesus, you know, from the Jesus that I'm with, resisted that resistance. He was crying over Jerusalem and saying, look, that's not what we're supposed to do. So it was very good to see that more, no, he's really talking to the people who, on a personal level, they don't want to change that thing. They want the people in those levels to respect and be generous to each other, not change that structure.
So that sense of it being a revolutionary thing we're going to read, like Marx's Das Kapital or something, where we're giving an analysis of society, now the revolution has to come to turn it over. Jesus didn't go there. It sounded like that, but he didn't go there.
That's where it looked like it was going, yeah.
The other that struck me too is there was a few years ago the Occupy Wall Street movement, and it was all the big cities had it, where there was the 1%ers at the top own and operate everything, and the 99%ers have to turn it over, which again has a sort of a bubbling up from below complaint of the system. And as you said, Brian McLaren starts out looking like that's where he's going to go,
right.
But he takes us by surprise by broadening the relationships among all those levels to where they actually are caring about one another. Anything, the first thing that struck you in particular in this chapter?
When are the multitudes not multitudes? And what I mean by that, let those who have eyes to see. When I looked at that, I think of multitudes, I think of wow. You know,
crowds.
Multitudes, crowds, and yet those crowds are invisible. For example, I have a son who's schizophrenic. He's 50 years old, lived in Alpena almost all his life. People don't see him, and they don't see the mentally ill community in Alpena, which is quite large and very significant. People that don't have somebody in that community don't understand that there is a whole viable community of mentally ill people. Also, I remember when we were at this church starting Habitat for Humanity and looking to find housing for the homeless, I can't tell you how many leaders in town and all around the community said, we don't have any homeless in Alpena. Well,
invisible.
Yes, we did, and we do, and but they're invisible. And so